The desert doesn't forgive. It doesn't apologize. And neither did I. I remember the morning they handed me my orders. The paper was clean, crisp, the kind of clean that has no idea what it's asking. My commander, Colonel Tariq, slid it across the table without looking up. He was sharpening a blade. Slow, deliberate. Like he always did when he wanted to make a point without saying a word. I read the orders. Then I folded them, put them in my chest pocket, right next to my heart. Target, Christian community, Northern Desert Corridor, eliminate the threat. I didn't flinch. I wasn't built to flinch. I was 26 years old, and I had already seen more death than most men see in a lifetime. The smell of gunpowder was so familiar to me that civilian air, clean air, actually made me uncomfortable. I needed the diesel, the dust, the iron tang of blood baked into cracked earth. That was real to me. That was home. I was the best in my unit, not just good, the best. My hands never shook. My aim never drifted. I could strip a rifle in the dark in under 30 seconds, assemble it blindfolded, and put 3 rounds through a man-sized target at 400 meters in a crosswind. Colonel Tariq called me his Ghazi, his warrior, his weapon, and I wore that like a medal. Brother, let me tell you something about that kind of life. When you're built into a machine, you stop feeling the weight of what you carry. The kills blur together, the faces fade. You replace conscience with mission. You replace doubt with discipline. And you start to believe, truly believe, that the man who feels nothing is the strongest man in the room. I believed that lie with everything I had. We loaded up before sunrise. 4 vehicles, 12 men, enough firepower to level a small village. Our target was a group of converts, men and women who had abandoned their faith, abandoned their identity, abandoned us, to follow some dead carpenter from Nazareth. Traitors, I was told. Enemies of the brotherhood. Threats to the order. I chambered around, checked my vest, tightened my boots. And somewhere out there, in a mud brick church in the middle of the desert, people were praying. They were praying for me. I didn't know that yet. I thought I knew what strength was, what power was, what it meant to be a man who feared nothing. I was about to learn. I knew absolutely nothing. Colonel Tariq was not a man you described. He was a man you survived. 6'2", built like he was carved from the same desert rock we trained on. He had a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his jaw. A gift, he said, from a man who was too slow to finish the job. He laughed when he told that story, every time, like it was the funniest thing in the world that someone had tried to kill him and failed. He didn't rule our unit through rank alone. Rank is just a title. Tariq ruled through fear, and he had spent 20 years perfecting it into an art form. I had seen him break a man's fingers one by one during an interrogation without changing his expression. Not rage, not pleasure, just efficiency, like he was completing paperwork. When Colonel Tariq walked into the barracks, grown men, hardened soldiers, killers, men with blood on their hands, stood straighter without being told. The air in the room changed. You felt it in your chest before you even saw him, and I was his favorite. That's important, because when the favorite falls, the punishment isn't just physical, it's personal. We were 3 days out from the operation when it happened. I'd been careful. I thought I'd been careful. But the desert has eyes, and so did Tariq. I had found something 2 weeks before the orders came. I'm going to tell you about that later, how it happened, what I found, what it did to me. But what you need to know right now is this. There was a small torn page hidden in the lining of my tactical vest. A single page. Scripture. Someone had pressed it into my hand during a supply run at a border outpost. A local trader, an old man with kind eyes who smiled like he knew something I didn't. I should have thrown it away. I read it instead. That page cost me everything. Tariq found it during a routine kit inspection. He didn't announce it. He didn't hold it up for the unit to see. Not yet. He simply walked to where I was standing at attention, stopped directly in front of me, and held the page between 2 fingers like it was a dead insect he'd pulled from his soup. The barracks went silent. 12 men, not one of them breathed. He read it slowly. His eyes moved across the words with something I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not disgust, curiosity. Then he looked up at me, and he smiled. That smile was worse than the scar. "So," he said, his voice low and almost gentle, "my best soldier is a traitor. Interesting. Commander, did I ask you to speak?" I closed my mouth. The concrete floor felt colder under my boots. The fluorescent light above us buzzed. Somewhere outside, a truck engine turned over and died. He folded the page, put it in his own chest pocket. Then he reached down, unholstered his sidearm, and checked the magazine with the slow, casual confidence of a man who has done this 10,000 times. He wasn't threatening me. He was reminding me of something I already knew, that in this room, in this unit, in this desert, he held life and death in his hands. "Kneel," he said. "Brother, I want you to understand something. I had never knelt for any man, not once. My father raised me to stand. My training taught me to fight. Kneeling meant submission. Submission meant weakness. And weakness was the one thing I had spent my entire life cutting out of myself like a cancer. But my legs bent, and I knelt. Not because I was afraid of the gun. Because something in me, something small and new and fragile, something that Paige had planted, told me that this moment mattered, that how I responded right now would define everything that came after. Tariq crouched down to my level, put the barrel of his sidearm against my forehead. Cold steel, perfectly steady. "You have 10 seconds, he said quietly. 10 seconds to renounce this Jesus. Tell me it was nothing. Tell me you found the page and kept it as evidence. Tell me you're still my soldier, and we forget this happened." He let the silence stretch. "Or," he continued, "I pull this trigger, and I never miss." 10 seconds. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could feel the sweat tracking down my spine beneath my tactical vest. I could smell the gun oil on that barrel pressed against my skull. And I could feel that page, now in his pocket, burning like an ember. "Commander," I said. My voice was steady. "I don't know how. I can't renounce what I don't fully understand yet." Something shifted in his eyes. Not softness. Something colder than rage. He stood up slowly, holstered the weapon, straightened his collar. "Then you have until the operation," he said. 3 days. Make your decision. Come back to your brothers, or I make the decision for you." He walked out. The door swung behind him. No one in that barracks looked at me. Not one man. 12 soldiers, 12 brothers. Men I had bled with, trained with, eaten dust with in the worst heat this desert could throw at us, and every single one of them stared at the floor. That was the moment I understood the true nature of fear. It doesn't just threaten you, it isolates you. And I was alone, completely, utterly alone. 3 days. I had 3 days to decide who I was. I had been a warrior my entire life. I had never lost a battle. But standing in that cold barracks, with the buzz of one broken light overhead and 12 pairs of eyes that refused to meet mine, I realized I was losing this one, and that maybe, just maybe, losing was exactly what God needed me to do. 3 days sounds like enough time to make a decision. It isn't. Not when the decision is your life. Not when every hour feels like the desert itself is pressing down on your chest, and the air is thick with diesel and dust, and the weight of everything you were raised to be. Not when you lie on your bunk at 0200 staring at the ceiling, listening to the breathing of men who used to be your brothers, men who now sleep with one eye open, waiting to see which way you fall. The first night I prayed, or I tried to. I didn't know how. I'd prayed before. The prayers I was taught, the ones carved into me from boyhood, structured, formal, words pointed at a God I respected but never knew. But that night, alone in my bunk with my boots still on and my hand pressed flat against my chest where that page used to be, I tried something different. I just talked. "If you're real," I whispered into the dark, "say something. Do something. Because I'm running out of time and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with what I've read." Silence. Not peaceful silence. Not the silence of a father letting his son find his footing, just empty silence. Desert silence. The kind that makes you feel like your words hit a wall 3 inches from your face and fell to the floor. Brother, have you ever prayed and felt nothing? Have you ever reached out into the dark and grabbed air? Have you ever asked God to show up and the only answer was the sound of your own heartbeat? That was me. For 3 days, that was me. The second day was worse. Tariq had me running drills with the unit, full combat kit, weighted packs, 40-pound vest, boots pounding the cracked earth in the killing heat of a desert afternoon. He didn't single me out. He didn't need to. The message was physical, deliberate, methodical. This is what you are. This is what you were built for. This is where you belong. I ran harder than anyone, lifted more, pushed further, not to impress him, not anymore. I did it because movement was the only thing keeping the war inside my head from swallowing me whole. But at night the walls closed in. I started to question everything, and I mean everything. What if that page was just words? What if the old man at the border outpost was a fool? What if I was throwing away everything I had built, my rank, my reputation, my brotherhood, my name, for a carpenter who died 2,000 years ago on the other side of the world? What kind of man does that? That thought hit me harder than any fist ever had, because it came in my father's voice. My father, Rashid, a man who carried himself like he owned the ground he walked on. Broad shoulders, hard jaw, eyes that never softened. Not for weakness, not for tears, and certainly not for doubt. He had handed me over to the military at 17 with a handshake. Not a hug, a handshake, and told me to come back a warrior or not come back at all. I had come back a warrior. Now I was lying on a military cot in the middle of a desert, quietly falling apart over a torn piece of paper. What would he say? I already knew. I'd heard it before, not directed at me, but at others. Men in our community who had strayed, men who had chosen wrong. My father's voice, low and certain as a death sentence. A man without honor is not a man. He is a ghost, and we do not mourn ghosts. That was the moment the shame hit me. Real shame. The masculine kind that doesn't announce itself. It just settles into your bones like cold water, heavy and slow, until you can't stand up straight under the weight of it. I wasn't afraid of dying. I want you to understand that. A bullet I could face, pain I could endure. I had been trained to absorb both without blinking. What I couldn't face was becoming nothing. A man without a unit, without a name, without a brotherhood, without identity, because without all of that, who was I? I'd spent my entire life building myself into something, a weapon, a warrior, a son worth keeping. And every brick in that wall was laid with the mortar of other men's approval, my father's, my commanders, my units. I didn't know it then, but God was about to show me that everything I had built my identity on was sand, and he was about to let it all collapse. The third night, the night before the operation, I hit the floor, not metaphorically, literally. I rolled off my bunk at some point past midnight, landed on my knees on the cold concrete, and I couldn't get back up, not because I was injured, because something inside me, something I had kept locked down with iron discipline for 26 years, finally cracked. My throat closed, my chest heaved, my hands pressed flat against the rough floor, and for the first time since I was maybe 8 years old, standing at my grandfather's grave and being told by my father that men don't cry at funerals, I wept. Not quiet tears, heaving, broken, ugly weeping, the kind that shakes your whole body, the kind that sounds like a man drowning in his own chest. I was a warrior who had lost his battle, a soldier with no orders he could follow, a son his father would disown, a man without a name. And in that moment, kneeling on cold concrete, tears dropping onto my knuckles, completely and utterly destroyed, I said the most honest prayer I had ever prayed in my life. Not eloquent, not structured, just raw. I don't know if you're there, I don't know if you hear me, But I have nothing left. I am nothing. If you're real, please, please, show me. The room stayed silent. The light outside the window was still dark. Nothing moved, but something shifted. Deep, internal. The way the air changes 1 second before a storm breaks, when you can't see it yet, can't hear it yet, but every cell in your body knows something is coming. I didn't know it then, but that prayer, broken, desperate, barely coherent, was the most powerful thing I had ever said in my life. Heaven had heard it, and the answer was already on its way. I was a warrior who had lost his battle, a protector who couldn't protect himself, a man with nothing left to hold on to, and I had nowhere left to turn, except UP. The operation was scheduled for 500. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bunk in full kit, boots laced, rifle across my knees, staring at the door like it owed me an answer. The barracks were quiet, except for the slow breathing of sleeping men and the distant groan of wind pushing sand against the outer walls. In 4 hours, we would load up, drive north, and I would either be the weapon Colonel Tariq built me to be, or I would be something else entirely. I still didn't know which. But God, in his perfect, almost brutal timing, wasn't finished with me yet. His name was Daud, Private Daud Hassan, 22 years old, quiet, slight build, the kind of soldier who gets overlooked in a unit full of hard men because he doesn't take up enough physical space to be noticed. He'd been assigned to our unit 3 months earlier, transferred from a southern post for reasons nobody explained and nobody asked about. He kept to himself, did his work, never complained, never caused trouble. I had barely spoken 10 words to him before that night. He appeared at the foot of my bunk at somewhere around 01:30. I had my hand on my rifle before I even registered who it was. That's what years of combat training does to you. Your body reacts before your mind catches up. But he raised both hands slowly, palms out, and in the dim light I could see his face was calm. Not the forced calm of a man hiding fear, genuine, settled, like a man who had already made his peace with whatever happened next. "I know what you're carrying," he said, barely above a whisper. "I've been watching you for 3 days. I didn't lower the rifle immediately. Watching me for what? Because I know that look," he said. "I had it once, 3 years ago, before I found the truth." Something in my chest went tight. "Sit down," I said, "and keep your voice down." He sat, and what he did next, in a military barracks, surrounded by sleeping soldiers, hours before a kill operation, was the single most dangerous act of courage I had ever witnessed in my life. He reached into the lining of his boot, pulled out a small battered book, worn leather cover, cracked at the spine, pages soft with handling. He placed it on the bunk between us, like he was setting down something sacred, a Bible, complete, Arabic translation. "Brother, I need you to understand the weight of that moment. This wasn't a man handing me a pamphlet. This was a soldier in a unit that had been ordered to eliminate Christians, placing the most forbidden object in our world directly between us, in the middle of the night, before a dawn operation. That wasn't recklessness. That was faith so solid it had no room left for fear. "I've been a believer for 3 years," he said quietly. "I've been praying for you for 2 weeks, since the day that traitor gave you that page." My jaw tightened. "You saw that?" "God saw it," he said simply, "and he told me to move." I stared at the book between us. My rifle was still in my hands. The irony of that wasn't lost on me, a weapon trained on a man offering me the word of God. Slowly, deliberately, I set the rifle down. "I've read 1 page," I said. "I don't even know what I believe." "That's fine," Daud said. "Truth doesn't need you to believe it to be true. It just needs you to look at it honestly." He opened the book. His hands, small, careful hands, nothing like mine, turned the pages with the ease of a man who had walked these roads 1,000 times. He stopped, pointed, Joshua 1:9. I read it silently first, then again, Then a third time, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Something moved inside my chest. I can't describe it better than that. Not emotion exactly, deeper than emotion. Like a frequency I had never heard before, but somehow already knew. Like a tuning fork struck against the part of me that had been vibrating wrong my entire life. "This was written for a soldier," I said. "Yes," Dodd said. "It was." He turned more pages. Ephesians 6. The armor of God, belt of truth, breastplate of righteousness, shield of faith, helmet of salvation, sword of the Spirit. I read it and felt the hair rise on my arms, because it was written in the language of a warrior, the language I had spoken my whole life, now aimed at something eternal. "This isn't a religion for weak men," I said slowly. It wasn't a question. It was a realization arriving late and arriving hard. "No," Dodd said. "It never was." We talked for 2 hours, in whispers, in the dark, with a Bible open between us and a rifle at my side, and 4 hours until we were supposed to load up and drive north to destroy people who read this same book. He told me his story, raised the same way I was, same fire, same iron, same hammer and anvil masculinity. How he had encountered the gospel through a prisoner he was guarding. How he had fought it for months. How it had broken him in all the right places. How Jesus had rebuilt him into something stronger than what he was before. "Stronger?" I said. "You're the quietest man in this unit." He smiled, and in that smile was something I had never seen on a soldier's face in all my years of service. Not pride, not aggression, not the cold performance of strength. Peace. "You've been confusing noise with power your whole life," he said. "So did I. Real strength doesn't need to announce itself." That hit me somewhere I hadn't been hit before. I held the Bible in my hands, calloused hands, hands that had held rifles and ropes and the tactical vests of men I was pulling out of danger, hands that had done things I wasn't proud of. I turned it over, felt the soft leather against my rough palms. "If I do this," I said quietly, "if I choose this path, I lose everything, my rank, my unit, my father, everything." Dodd nodded. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't offer me a comfortable lie. He looked me in the eye like one man to another and told me the truth. "Yes," he said, "you probably will. But brother, listen to me. What you gain is worth everything you lose. I promise you that on my life." I looked down at the page still open in my hands. Proverbs 27:17. "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." I thought about every man who had ever shaped me, my father, Colonel Tariq, every commander, every trainer, every hard-fisted soldier who had hammered me into the weapon I was. All that iron, all that sharpening, and every single one of them had made me sharper for the wrong battles. Now here was this quiet, overlooked, underestimated soldier, sitting on the edge of my bunk at 0200 in a combat barracks, sharpening me for the only battle that actually mattered. "I need to think," I said. "You have until 500, Dodd said. He stood, took the Bible, then stopped, reached into his boot again and pulled out something else, a single folded paper. He set it on my bunk. "Keep this one," he said. "It's already yours." He walked back to his bunk without another word. I unfolded the paper. 3 verses, hand-copied in careful Arabic script. At the bottom, Dodd had written 4 words in the margin. "He is already waiting." I sat there until the sky outside the narrow barracks window began to shift from black to the deep, bruised purple of pre-dawn. The desert wind had died down. Everything was still. I was standing at a crossroads. I could feel both paths beneath my feet, one familiar, solid, built from years of iron discipline and blood and brotherhood, and a name I had earned through violence. The other path was narrow, uncertain, costly, and led somewhere I couldn't fully see. One path, keep fighting my way, keep being the weapon, keep being Tariq's Ghazi, keep being my father's warrior son. The other path, surrender, to a king I couldn't see, a father I'd never known, a battle I hadn't been trained for. I looked at that paper one last time. I chose surrender. And that's when the real battle began, 1 hour before the operation. I was alone in the equipment bay, a concrete room at the back of the compound where we staged our gear before missions. Cold floor, metal shelving, the smell of gun oil and rubber and dried sweat baked into canvas, a single bulb hanging from a wire overhead, throwing more shadow than light. I had told the duty guard I needed to run a final equipment check. He didn't question it. Nobody questions the unit's best soldier doing extra prep before a mission. I wasn't checking equipment. I was on my knees, both of them, on that cold, concrete floor. The same floor I had walked across 100 times in boots, carrying weapons, carrying orders, carrying the weight of a man who felt nothing and called it strength. Now I was kneeling on it. No rifle, no vest, just me, just my hands pressed flat on the rough surface and my forehead bowed and that folded paper crumpled in my fist. I didn't have eloquent words. I had already used up all my words in 3 days of desperate, unanswered silence. So I said the only thing left. I surrender. 2 words, barely audible, swallowed almost immediately by the concrete walls. I don't know you, not really, but I know what I've been. I know what these hands have done. I know where I was going this morning, what I was going to do to people who read your word. And I can't. I can't do it. Whatever that costs me, I accept it. I'm done fighting my way. I surrender. I'm yours. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. And then the temperature in the room changed. I felt it before I saw anything. A warmth, not the dry, suffocating heat of the desert, but something different, layered, deep. The kind of warmth that moves from the outside of your skin inward, through muscle and bone, until it reaches somewhere you don't have a name for. The kind of warmth that makes your body understand safety before your mind has time to process it. I kept my eyes down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something I didn't have a word for yet. Then I heard it, not loud, not the booming theatrical voice I might have imagined if I'd thought about it beforehand. Nothing like that. It was quiet, the quietest sound in that room. And yet, somehow, it was the only sound. Like everything else. The wind outside, the distant idle of a truck engine, the buzz of that overhead bulb, all of it dropped away. And this voice was what remained. 1 word. My name. Not my rank, not soldier, not Ghazi. My name, the one my mother gave me, the one I hadn't heard spoken with tenderness since I was a small boy. Spoken now with a weight and an intimacy that cracked something open in the center of my chest, like a fault line giving way. I looked up. Brother, I need you to hear me when I say this, and I need you to believe that I am not a man who exaggerates, and I am not a man who invents things for effect. What I am about to tell you is exactly what I saw. He was standing in the corner of the room. I don't know when he entered. The door hadn't opened. The walls hadn't moved. But he was there. And the room that had felt small and cold and concrete 30 seconds ago suddenly felt like the most significant location on the face of the earth, like standing on holy ground without being told. Your body just knows. He was not what I expected. I think, if I had imagined Jesus before that night, I would have pictured something soft, something passive. The images I had been shown by those who mocked Christians, a pale, delicate figure, weak-eyed, barely substantial. An insult to masculinity, a religion for men who couldn't fight. What I saw destroyed that image completely and permanently. He stood like a commander, shoulders back, presence filling the room the way Colonel Tariq's presence filled a room, but without the cold, without the threat, without the performance of power that needs an audience to exist. This was power that simply was, authority that needed no enforcement because it was absolute. He was wearing, and I know how this sounds, I know, but stay with me. He was wearing what I can only describe as the garment of a warrior. Not modern combat gear exactly, but layered, purposeful, worn. the way a soldier looks after a long campaign. Not pristine, not ceremonial, functional. The garment of a man who had been in the field, who had done the work, who carried every battle he'd ever fought written into the fabric of who he was, his hands. I looked at his hands first, because that's what soldiers do, we check the hands. And what I saw stopped my breath entirely. Scars, not fresh wounds, healed scars, the kind that come from something driven completely through. Not a cut, not a graze, but through. And those hands were open, palms up, facing me, not threatening, not demanding, offering. His eyes were what undid me completely. I have looked into the eyes of dangerous men my entire life. I know what controlled violence looks like behind a man's eyes. I know what cold calculation looks like. I know what hatred looks like, what contempt looks like. What the eyes of a man who has decided you are already dead look like. His eyes held none of that, but they held fire. Real fire, not anger, something older and deeper than anger. The fire of a man who has seen everything, endured everything, and still chooses to stand here, in this room, with me, with my hands, with everything written on my record. And in those fire-filled eyes was something that broke me more thoroughly than any beating, any humiliation, any loss I had ever endured. He already knew everything, and he came anyway. He looked at my hands, my calloused, blood-stained, weapon-worn hands, still pressed against the concrete floor. He looked at them the way a father looks at a son who has come home from a war the father sent him into, with grief and with love so tangled together they can't be separated. "I know what you've done," he said. His voice was, I cannot fully describe it even now. It was the voice of absolute authority, command. The kind of voice that when it speaks, the atmosphere around it reorganizes itself. And simultaneously, it was the most tender thing I had ever heard. Like strength and compassion had never been opposites. Like they had always been the same thing, and I had just never seen them occupying the same space before. "I know every mission, every order you followed, every man. I know what these hands have done. I know what you were going to do this morning." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed entirely. And I am still here. Those 5 words. Brother, those 5 words hit me with more force than anything that had ever been aimed at me in combat, because they weren't condemnation, they weren't pity, they were a declaration, a soldier's declaration. I held my position. I did not retreat. I am still here. Something broke in me then, something deep and structural, like a load-bearing wall giving way, and what came out of me wasn't weakness. I understand that now, but in that moment it felt like the most vulnerable, terrifying, uncontrolled thing I had ever experienced. I wept. Not the quiet tears of a man trying to hold himself together, not the dignified grief of someone maintaining composure. I wept the way I had wept alone in that barracks 3 nights before, heaving, broken, from the gut. But this time it wasn't despair driving the tears. It was something I didn't have a word for yet. Relief so profound it expressed itself like pain. The release of every wall I had built, every mask I had worn, every layer of false strength I had welded onto myself since I was 17 years old, all of it coming off at once. Warrior tears, that's what they were. The tears of a man who has finally found something worth surrendering to. And then, and this is the part that will stay with me until the day I leave this earth. He knelt, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one whose voice had just reorganized the atmosphere of a concrete equipment bay in the middle of a desert. He knelt, beside me, on the same cold floor, and he placed his hand on my shoulder. I felt that hand. I need you to hear that. I felt it, not metaphorically, the weight of it, the warmth of it, real and solid and present in a way that nothing in my physical world had ever been. "You were made for battle," he said, and there was a smile in his voice, not mocking, not gentle in a weak sense, but the smile of a general looking at a soldier he has always known was his. "I built the warrior in you, every bit of that strength, the endurance, the discipline, the fire. I put that in you, but you've been fighting for the wrong kingdom. I lifted my face, looked at him through wrecked, tear-blurred eyes. The things I've done, I started, are covered, he said, simply, finally, with the authority of someone who has already settled the matter and is not interested in reopening the negotiation. The cross was not decoration, it was the mission, and I completed it. For you, for those hands, for every name on your record. I broke again, harder. Come, he said. His hand tightened on my shoulder, the grip of a commander commissioning a soldier, not the touch of someone consoling the weak. Fight for me, and I will show you what true strength is, not the strength that kills, the strength that restores, not the strength that dominates, the strength that lays down its life. That is the strength that conquers everything, even death. I don't know how to be anything other than a weapon, I whispered. I know, he said. That's why I came myself. I don't know how long I was in that room. Time moved differently. When I became aware of my surroundings again, the concrete, the single bulb, the smell of gun oil, the warmth was still present. The corner of the room was just a corner, but something had permanently, irrevocably changed. Not the room. Me. I had fought men. I had faced death. I had stared down the barrel of a gun pressed against my own skull and not flinched. But I had never, not once in my entire life, felt power like what moved through that room. It wasn't violence. It wasn't force. It wasn't the cold iron authority of men who rule through fear. It was love. And it didn't make me soft. It didn't make me passive. It didn't make me anything resembling the weak, pale caricature I had been taught to despise. It broke me completely, and in the breaking, it made me more of a man than I had ever been. I stood up from that concrete floor, a different soldier. Same hands, same scars, same calloused palms and combat-trained body, but a different king, a different mission, a different battle, and for the first time in my life, standing alone in an equipment bay at 0430 in the middle of a desert with an operation loading up outside and a commander who wanted me dead and a father who would disown me, I was not afraid, not even a little. 5 minutes before the operation, I could hear the vehicles outside, diesel engines turning over, growling to life in the pre-dawn dark, boots on gravel, the metallic percussion of weapons being checked, magazines seated, chambers cleared and loaded. The sounds of men preparing to do violence, sounds I had heard dozens of times, sounds that used to settle something in me the way a familiar song settles a child. They didn't settle me now. I walked out of the equipment bay and into the compound yard. The sky above the desert was that specific shade of dark blue that exists for maybe 10 minutes before sunrise. Not black anymore, not light yet. Just this deep, bruised, in-between color that feels like the world holding its breath. 12 men, 4 vehicles, full combat kit. And Colonel Tariq standing at the front of the lead vehicle with his arms folded across his chest, watching me walk toward him like a man who has already calculated every possible outcome of the next 60 seconds and is comfortable with all of them. He looked at my face, and I watched something shift in his expression, almost imperceptible. The kind of micro-read you only catch if you've spent years studying dangerous men. Something he saw in my eyes that he hadn't seen there before. Something he didn't have a category for. He unfolded his arms. "You've made your decision," he said. Not a question. The yard went quiet. Not the quiet of men pretending not to listen. The quiet of men who have stopped pretending. Every soldier in that compound was watching. I could feel their eyes on my back, on my face, measuring me, waiting. I stopped 6 feet from him. "Yes," I said, "I have." He studied me for a long moment. The sky was beginning to pale at the edges. Somewhere far to the north, in the direction we were supposed to be driving, a bird called once and went silent. "Then say it," Tariq said quietly. "Say it in front of your brothers. Renounce this Christian nonsense. Get in the vehicle. And we forget the last 3 days ever happened. You're still my Ghazi. You're still the best man I have. Don't throw that away." Brother, I want you to understand something about that moment. Because it wasn't simple. It wasn't the clean cinematic choice that it might sound like from the outside. Tariq wasn't just offering me my rank. He was offering me identity. The only identity I had ever known. The thing I had built myself into from the age of 17. The thing my father had raised me toward my entire life. And part of me, I'll be honest with you, because that's what this is for, part of me felt the pull of it. The familiar gravitational weight of who I used to be, calling me back like a current. I felt it. And then I felt something else. The weight of a hand on my shoulder. Not physical, not the way it had been in that equipment bay, but present, certain, unmistakable. I am still here. I looked Colonel Tariq in the eyes. I can't renounce him, I said. My voice was steady, steadier than I expected. I won't. Not today. Not ever. The silence in that yard was absolute. Tariq's jaw tightened, one slow, almost imperceptible clench, the only outward sign that what I'd just said had landed anywhere beneath his surface. Then he nodded, one small, deliberate nod, the way a man nods when something he half expected has been confirmed. He reached for his sidearm. I didn't step back. I didn't raise my hands. I stood exactly where I was, feet shoulder-width apart, spine straight, chin level, at attention. Not the attention of a subordinate obeying a commander, the attention of a soldier reporting to a higher authority than the one standing in front of him. Tariq drew the weapon, raised it, aimed it directly at my forehead. Last chance, he said. I've given you more of those than you deserve. Renounce him, right now, in front of these men. Behind me, I heard someone shift their weight, the crunch of a boot on gravel, the sound of someone breathing harder than the situation required. Whether it was fear for me or fear of Tariq, I couldn't tell. I looked down the barrel of that gun, the same cold steel that had pressed against my skull 3 days ago, the same eye of that same weapon, aimed by the same steady hand that never missed, and I thought of his hands, scars through the center, palms open, offering. Commander, I said, I'm a soldier of Christ now. I won't be renouncing my king. If you need to pull that trigger, then pull it. Something moved across Tariq's face. Not rage, something rawer than rage. Something that looked, just for a fraction of a second, almost like fear. Like a man who has just realized the ground under his feet is not as solid as he built his life believing. He pulled the trigger. Click. Misfire. He pulled again. Click. Again. Click. His eyes dropped to the weapon, his hand, that perfectly steady, combat-trained, never misses hand, visibly tightened on the grip. He checked the chamber, reseated the magazine, raised it again. Click, click. 5 pulls, 5 misfires. I watched the color drain from Colonel Tariq's face. He was a man who understood weapons the way a musician understands his instrument, intuitively, completely, without doubt. He knew what a properly loaded, properly functioning sidearm felt like in his hand. He knew the difference between mechanical failure and something that had no mechanical explanation. This had no mechanical explanation. He lowered the weapon slowly, stared at it, then looked up at me, and in his eyes, for the first and only time in all the years I had known and feared and served this man, I saw something I never expected to see there. Uncertainty. What? His voice came out quieter than I had ever heard it, stripped of the command, stripped of the performance, stripped of everything he used to fill a room. Just a man's voice, raw, shaken. What are you? I held his gaze. I'm a man who belongs to someone you can't override, I said. The yard was completely still. Not one man moved, not one engine idled. Even the desert wind had stopped. It felt like the world itself was waiting to see what happened next. Tariq stared at me for a long moment. Then he holstered the weapon, slowly, deliberately. He straightened his collar, that same gesture he always used to reclaim composure, but this time it didn't work. The composure wasn't there to reclaim. He turned to the unit. Get in the vehicles, he said. His voice was flat. We move in 2 minutes. Nobody moved immediately. Every man in that yard was looking between their commander and me with the eyes of men whose world has just been reorganized without their permission. Move, Tariq said. Harder. They moved. He turned back to me last, stepped close. His voice dropped to where only I could hear it. You're finished here, he said. Your rank, your place in this unit. Your name in this organization. All of it. Finished. When we get back from this operation, I will personally see to it that you disappear. Do you understand me?" "Yes," I said. "You're not afraid?" "No." He searched my face for something, a crack, a flinch, any hairline fracture of doubt he could put a lever into. He found nothing, and that, I think, disturbed him more than anything else that had happened in the last 5 minutes. He held my gaze for 3 more seconds, then he turned and walked to the lead vehicle without looking back. The convoy pulled out, gravel under tires, diesel exhaust hanging in the pale morning air. I watched the 4 vehicles move through the compound gate and out onto the desert road heading north, toward the mud brick church, toward people who were praying. I stood in the empty yard. And then I did something I hadn't planned and couldn't have predicted. I laughed. Not the hollow performance laugh of a man pretending, not the nervous release of someone who barely survived something. A real laugh, deep from the chest, the laugh of a man who has just discovered that the thing he was most afraid of losing, his strength, his identity, his fearlessness, not only survived what he thought would destroy it, but had been made more real by the surrender. I had no rank, no unit, no mission orders, no commander, no plan for what happened next. I had never felt more like a warrior in my life. But the cost was coming, and it came fast. They came for me that evening. Not Tariq. He sent 3 men from a secondary unit. Men I didn't know. Men with no personal history with me, which made them more dangerous, not less. They came with zip ties and a black bag, and the flat professional efficiency of men executing an order, not settling a grudge. They worked methodically, there's no other word for it. Ribs, face, kidneys, the places that don't show immediately and hurt the longest. They weren't trying to kill me. Not yet. They were sending a message. The message that Tariq still controlled what happened in his desert, regardless of what a gun had or hadn't done that morning. I took it. Every blow. On the ground, on my side, tasting blood and dust, the iron tang of it, the grit of desert sand mixed in, coating my throat. Brother, I'm not going to pretend I was singing hymns on that ground. I'm not going to package it cleanly for you. It hurt. It hurt the way only a professional beating hurts. Deep and systematic and designed to linger. My ribs screamed with every breath. My eye swelled shut. My lip was split clean through. But something extraordinary was happening simultaneously. With every blow, I felt that presence, not removing the pain, not supernaturally numbing me to it, but with me in it. The way a soldier stays beside a wounded brother in the field, not taking the wound from him, but refusing to leave him alone in it. I am still here. At some point they stopped. I heard boots walking away, the gate closing. I lay on the ground of that empty compound yard for a long time. The stars were fully out now. The desert sky at night is unlike anything else on this earth. So many stars it looks like someone spilled light across black velvet. I lay on my back and looked up at them and breathed, careful, measured breaths around the protest of my ribs, and I said, "Thank you, not for the beating, for the presence in it, for the proof that what happened in that equipment bay at 0400 was not a dream, not a breakdown, not a desperate hallucination conjured by a sleep-deprived soldier under unbearable pressure. It was real. He was real. And I would rather lie bleeding in a desert yard belonging to nobody, no rank, no unit, no name in any military record, than stand unbroken in that compound as Tariq's weapon. I chose Jesus. I lost everything. And somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the blood and the dust and the cost of it all, I gained a kingdom. I couldn't stay in that compound. That much was clear before I even got off the ground. Tariq was methodical, patient, a man who operated on timelines, not impulses. He hadn't killed me that morning, not because he couldn't, not because the gun had shaken something permanent loose in him, but because a body in his compound before an operation created complications, paperwork, questions from above. When he came back from the north, the calculation would be different, the timeline would be clear, and I would be at the end of it. I had maybe 8 hours. I got up slowly. Every breath was a negotiation with my ribs, shallow enough not to ignite the pain, deep enough to keep me functional. My left eye was nearly swollen shut. I ran my tongue across my teeth, checking. All present, small mercies. I spat blood onto the gravel, straightened up, and took inventory the way I had been trained. Injuries, assets, options, timeline. Injuries, significant but manageable, nothing that would stop me from moving. Assets, the clothes on my back, my boots, the folded paper still somehow in my pocket, crumpled now, stained at one corner with what I realized was my own blood, but intact. Options, limited, but not zero. Timeline, 8 hours, maybe less. I thought of Dodd. He had gone on the operation with the unit. He had no choice. Absence would have marked him immediately, and Dodd's survival depended on invisibility. He was a believer operating deep inside enemy territory, and he understood the terrain better than anyone. But he had told me something during those 2 hours in the dark. An address, a name, a place where, if I ever needed to move, I could go. There is a man, he had said. His name is Brother Elias. He runs a small auto repair shop at the edge of the market district in the nearest town, 40 kilometers east. Tell him the iron sharpens iron. He'll know what it means. He'll know what to do. 40 kilometers east, on foot, through open desert, with cracked ribs and a swollen eye and no water, and a window of 8 hours before Tariq came back from the north. I've done worse. I moved at first light, kept low where the terrain gave me cover, dry riverbeds, rock outcroppings, the long shadows of early morning cutting across the sand. The desert in the early hours is almost beautiful if you can separate it from everything it has cost you. The light comes in at a low angle and turns everything amber and copper and long-shadowed, and the air still holds a trace of the night's cold before the sun burns it away. I moved through it like I had moved through every hostile environment in my career, steady, measured, conserving energy, reading the ground. My ribs reminded me every 100 meters that this was not a training exercise. I prayed while I walked. Not formatted prayer, not structured recitation, just talking, the same rough, direct communication I had stumbled into on that barracks floor 3 nights ago. Talking to him the way one soldier talks to another on a long march when there's nothing left to perform and no energy left to pretend. I need water. I need to make 40 kilometers. I need Tariq to stay north long enough for me to clear his reach. I need you to be as real in the next 8 hours as you were in that room at 0400. That's what I need. He was. I won't catalog every moment of that walk. Some things belong between a man and his God, and the desert road is one of them. What I will tell you is that I made those 40 kilometers. I made them with cracked ribs and one functional eye and no water for the first 6 hours. And when I finally reached the edge of the market district, the sun was directly overhead, and the heat was absolute, and I was running on something that had nothing to do with physical reserves. The auto repair shop was exactly where Dodd had described. Small, corrugated metal roof. 2 vehicles in various stages of disassembly outside. The smell of motor oil and hot metal. A radio playing somewhere inside, turned low. A man in his 50s emerged from beneath a truck chassis as I approached, heavy-set, gray at his temples, hands permanently darkened with grease. He looked at my face, took in the swollen eye, the dried blood at the corner of my mouth, the way I was holding my left side. His expression didn't change, not alarm, not surprise, just a careful, steady assessment. I need to speak to Brother Elias, I said. You're speaking to him, he said. Iron sharpens iron, I said. He looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then he set down his wrench, walked to the shop entrance, looked both directions along the street with the practiced casualness of a man who has been doing this for years, and said, Come inside, quickly. Brother Elias was the first Christian man I had ever sat across a table from in full knowledge of what he was. He brought water, clean, cold, more of it than I thought I needed, and flatbread, and something for the pain. And he sat across from me while I drank and ate, and he asked me nothing for a full 10 minutes. Just let me be, let me breathe, let me exist in a space where nobody wanted me dead or compliant or performing anything. I hadn't realized how much I needed that until I had it. When I finally talked, it came out in pieces. Not the ordered, sequential debrief of a soldier making his report, but fragments, the page, Dodd, the 3 days, the equipment bay, the yard, the gun, 5 clicks, the beating, the walk. Elias listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward and put his grease-darkened hand on the table between us, not touching me, just present, and said, "Brother, welcome to the army." I broke down again. Right there, at his table. The second time in as many days that I had wept in front of another man. And this time I didn't fight it, didn't try to locate and neutralize it. I just let it move through me the way a wave moves. Present, powerful, and then gone, leaving something cleaner in its wake. Elias made contact that night through channels I won't detail for the safety of people still operating in that region. Within 48 hours I was moved. The back of a supply truck, buried under canvas and dry goods, breathing diesel and dust for 6 hours. Within a week I was across the border. Within a month, I was in a city I had never been to, with documents I had never had, sitting in a small apartment that smelled like damp concrete and cooking spices and the particular staleness of a place where people come to begin again. I was alive. I was free. I was completely, utterly alone. Brother, I want to be honest with you about this part, because the testimonies you hear sometimes skip it. The part after the miracle, after the escape, after the dramatic moment when God shows up and the gun misfires and the man walks out of the desert. They skip straight to the transformation and the new life and the joy. But there is a valley between the miracle and the new life. And that valley is real, and it is long, and it is where a lot of men lose what they found in the desert. I sat in that apartment for 3 weeks and felt almost nothing. The adrenaline that had carried me through the escape had burned off completely. The supernatural intensity of that equipment bay encounter felt distant, not false, but far, the way a lighthouse looks from the middle of the ocean. Real, but very far away. I had no unit, no mission, no structure, no brotherhood, no rank, no name that meant anything in this city, no father who would receive my call. I tried calling him. Once, 3 weeks in. He picked up on the second ring. "Baba," I said, a long silence. "I heard what you did," he said. His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Hard-jawed, certain, the voice of a man who had decided long before picking up the phone. "I don't have a son anymore. Baba, please. You've dishonored our name, everything I built you to be, everything I gave you." A pause. "Don't call this number again." The line went dead. I sat with that phone in my hand for a long time, in that damp apartment in a foreign city, a man without a father's name, without a bloodline that claimed him, without the identity that had been built around him like a fortress since birth. And I felt the grief of it. Real, deep, masculine grief, not the performed mourning of someone seeking sympathy, but the private, structural grief of a man who has lost something foundational, the grief of a son. I let myself feel it, all of it, because he had taught me in that equipment bay that real strength doesn't run from pain, it walks through it. And then, slowly, imperfectly, one day at a time, the new life began to take shape. Elias had connected me to a small underground church in the city. 8 men, meeting in a basement apartment on Tuesday nights. No signage, no announcement, just 8 men sitting in a circle on mismatched chairs with Bibles open across their knees, and the particular quality of quiet that settles over men who have chosen something costly. The first night I walked in, I stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at them. 8 men from different backgrounds, different stories, different faces, but with something in their eyes I recognized, something I had first seen in Dodd's face in that dark barracks. Peace. The leader of the group, a man named Marcus, a former civil engineer who had lost his business and his home over his faith, stood up when he saw me, looked at my face, the fading bruises, the healing eye, the way I still held my left side when I moved. He didn't ask questions. He just crossed the room, put both hands on my shoulders, and said, "Brother, we've been praying for you." And just like that, I had a brotherhood again, not built on violence, not cemented by shared bloodshed or the cold bond of men who survive combat together because they have no other option, built on something older and stronger and more durable than any of that. built on the shared decision to follow a king who knelt on a concrete floor and put his hand on a broken soldier's shoulder. Iron sharpening iron. I grew fast in that basement, not because I was special, because I was hungry. The Bible that had once been a dangerous, forbidden object hidden in a boot became the thing I reached for first every morning. The prayers that had once felt like words hitting a wall became conversations, real ones, the kind where you talk, and then you stop, and you listen, and you start to hear. I started leading. Slowly at first, sharing what I knew, what I had seen, what I had experienced in that equipment bay. Men would lean forward when I spoke, not because I was eloquent, because I had been there, because I carried the specific authority of someone who has stood in front of a loaded gun for this king and watched it misfire 5 times. That kind of testimony doesn't need polish. New men started coming to the basement, men like me, former soldiers, former fighters, men with histories written in violence who had encountered something they couldn't dismiss and couldn't outrun. Men who needed to know that Jesus wasn't a religion for the passive, the soft, the men who had nothing left to lose. Men who needed to know he was a king for warriors. I became a shepherd, or, more accurately, I became what I had always been, aimed in a new direction, a protector, but now protecting souls instead of territory, a fighter, but now fighting for men who were where I had been, in the dark, on the floor, with nothing left but one desperate prayer and a folded piece of paper. Dodd found me 14 months later. I won't go into the details of how there are people whose safety depends on those details staying quiet, but he found me. He showed up at the door of that apartment one evening, thinner than I remembered, with new shadows in his eyes that told me the 14 months had cost him something significant. He stood in my doorway and looked at me. I grabbed him by the back of the neck, the way soldiers greet each other when words aren't enough, and pulled him across the threshold. "You're late," I said. He laughed. That same quiet, settled laugh of a man who has made his peace. "I had some things to finish," he said. We sat up until 0300 that night, talking, praying. 2 former soldiers in a small apartment, iron sharpening iron, planning how to reach more men like us. Men in barracks and training camps and prison cells and tribal councils and family homes where the weight of false masculinity was crushing the life out of sons who didn't know there was another way. I was still a fighter, but now I fought for souls. And this battle, this one, the one fought on knees and in basements and in the quiet spaces between a man's pride and his breaking point, this is the only battle that has ever mattered. I want to tell you what my life looks like now. Not because it's perfect, not because the cost has disappeared, or the scars have faded, or the losses have been somehow magically restored. I want to tell you because I think you need to see what's on the other side of surrender, what's waiting for a man who puts down the wrong weapon and picks up the right one. I wake up every morning before dawn. Old habit, the military never fully leaves your body clock. But now instead of checking my weapon and my orders, I sit in the quiet dark and I open my Bible and I talk to my king. Not formally, not with performance, like a soldier debriefing with his commander at the start of a day. Here's where I am, here's what I'm facing, here's what I need, what are the orders? And he speaks, not always in the dramatic, room-filling way he spoke in that equipment bay, more often in the quiet. A verse that lands differently than it did yesterday, a thought that arrives with a certainty that isn't mine, a direction that emerges from the stillness with the unmistakable clarity of a command from a voice you've learned to recognize. I lead a church now, not a building with a sign, a network of small groups, men, mostly, though not exclusively, meeting in apartments and back rooms, and in some locations I won't name, in places where the risk is still very real. Men who were where I was. Men who needed someone to tell them that Jesus doesn't ask you to stop being a warrior. He asks you to redirect the warrior toward the battles that actually change eternity. I have a wife. I need to tell you about her because she is part of this story and she deserves to be named, not by name for her safety, but by what she is. She is the strongest person I know. And I say that as a man who has stood in front of a loaded gun without flinching. She chose me when choosing me was dangerous. She prays with the intensity of someone who understands that prayer is not passive. It is the most aggressive, offensive action available to a believer. She is my partner, my equal in faith, the person who, when I wake from nightmares about the desert, and I still do, occasionally, the mind holds what the hands have done, puts her hand on my chest and says simply, "He's still here." We have a son. I look at him and I feel something I don't have adequate words for. He is 3 years old. He has no idea yet what his father was, what his father did, what his father walked out of. He knows that his father reads him stories at night and prays over him in the morning and holds him with hands that used to hold rifles and now hold him. I am breaking a generational stronghold with these hands. That's what I'm doing every morning when I pray over that boy. Every stronghold my father's father passed to my father passed to me. The iron-fisted performance of strength, the equation of hardness with manhood, the belief that a man who shows tenderness has shown weakness. I am dismantling it, brick by brick, prayer by prayer, story by story at bedtime. My son will know what real strength looks like, not because I'll tell him, because I'll show him. That is the new mission, and it is harder, more demanding, more requiring of genuine courage than anything Colonel Tariq ever asked of me. Now, I need to speak to you directly, not generally. Directly. Because you didn't find this video by accident. I don't believe in accidents anymore, not since a concrete equipment bay at 0400 in the middle of a desert. You are here because something brought you here, and I think you know what that something is. To the warriors, to the soldiers, to the fighters. You know how to take pain. You've been trained to suppress it, redirect it, weaponize it. You've built yourself into something formidable, and you wear that like armor. I know. I was you. But brother, let me ask you something that nobody in your unit, your training, your chain of command ever asked you. What are you fighting for? Not tactically, not strategically, ultimately. When the mission is over, when the rank means nothing, when the body that carried all that training starts to age and slow, what did it all mean? What flag were you actually fighting under? I fought under the wrong flag for years. I was loyal to commanders who would have put a bullet in my head without losing sleep. I gave my best years to a kingdom that would have discarded me the moment I was no longer useful. There is a king who will never discard you, who came into a cold concrete room to find you, who knelt beside you in the dirt, who looked at your hands, everything written on them, and said, "I am still here. You know how to fight. You have been built for battle." That drive, that discipline, that refusal to quit, God put that in you. He didn't put it there for the wrong kingdom. He put it there for his. Come fight for the right king. I promise you, this army makes everything else look like a skirmish. To the fathers, I know some of you are watching this and thinking about your son. Maybe he's already left. Maybe he's pulling away and you can feel it and you don't know what to do with that feeling. So you do what men like us do. You get harder. You push. You issue ultimatums. You make him choose between your approval and his own soul. I'm asking you, man to man, father to future father, don't make that choice for him. My father said I don't have a son anymore. He said it with certainty, with finality, with the absolute conviction of a man who believed that honor required it. He was wrong, and the cost of that wrongness is a gulf between us that I still feel, that I pray over, that I believe God is not finished with, because he is a God of restoration, and I have seen him restore things that looked permanently broken. But I can't make my father choose differently. I can only tell you, you still have time. Lead your family to Jesus, not by forcing them, by showing them. Be the man in your home who prays, who admits when he's wrong, who leads not by domination, but by service, who loves his wife the way Christ loved the church, sacrificially, completely, without condition. That is the most powerful thing a man can do in his home, and it will outlast every achievement, every rank, every reputation you have ever built. Be the spiritual warrior your family needs, while you still can. To the sons, maybe you're watching this, and you recognize my story in yours. Not necessarily the desert, not necessarily the military, but the dynamic. The father who rules through fear. The family system that demands performance and withholds love. The constant pressure to be harder, stronger, less, 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 less feeling, less doubt, less humanity, until you've compressed yourself into something that barely resembles the boy you started as. Maybe you made a choice for Jesus, for truth, for something real, and it cost you your father's name. Maybe you're sitting somewhere right now carrying the weight of his rejection and wondering if you made the wrong call. You didn't. Your earthly father may have closed the door. Let me tell you what I know from the floor of a concrete room at 0400 in the middle of a desert. Your heavenly Father never will. He doesn't close doors. He walks through walls. He enters locked rooms. He shows up in the places where you have nothing left and everyone else has left, and the darkness is at its most absolute. And he says your name, your real name, the one he gave you before any earthly father had the chance to define you. You are not what your father's rejection says you are. You are what your father's voice says you are. Chosen, commissioned, a warrior in the only army that wins in the end. Hold that. Let it be more real to you than the closed door. Because it is, to every man watching. Brother, I need you to hear this next part clearly. Real strength is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward anyway, toward the right thing, regardless of the cost. Real courage is not holding the gun. It's putting it down when your king tells you to and trusting that his protection is more reliable than your firepower. Real manhood is not the performance of toughness for an audience of men who are all performing the same thing for each other. It's the private, daily, costly decision to serve something greater than your own reputation. I was the best soldier in my unit. I had the rank, the record, the reputation. I had the commander's trust and my father's pride, and everything a man in my world was supposed to want. And I was empty, hollow, a weapon with no soul. Jesus didn't make me less of a warrior. He made me more of one, because for the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something that is actually worth the cost. For the first time, the battle I'm in is one that matters beyond this life, this desert, this body, this name. I'm fighting for souls, for sons, for men sitting in the dark on the floor of their own desert, holding a torn piece of paper, wondering if what they've read could possibly be real. It's real. He's real, and he is already in the room with you. I want to pray with you now. Not a performance, not a formula, just a soldier speaking to his king on behalf of his brothers. If this is your moment, if something in you has been moving while you watch this, if the ground beneath the life you've built has been shifting, if you are at the end of your own strength and you need to know if there's something more, then pray this with me. Mean every word. Jesus, I've been fighting the wrong battles. I've been building the wrong kingdom, serving the wrong commanders, carrying the wrong weapons. I've been calling hardness strength and calling pride honor and calling emptiness discipline. I'm done. I've seen what real strength looks like. I've heard what a real king sounds like. And I know that everything I've built without you is sand. So I'm doing the hardest thing I've ever done. I surrender, not to weakness, to you, to the only one who looked at everything I am, everything I've done, everything I've been, and came anyway, who knelt beside me in the dirt, who put scarred hands on my broken shoulders and called me by name. Forgive me, rebuild me, commission me, make me a warrior for your kingdom. I don't know all that means yet. I don't have it figured out, but I'm yours. From this moment, I am yours. Amen. Brother, if you just prayed that, welcome to the army. It's the hardest fight you'll ever be in. The enemy is real. The cost is real. The battle is real. But the king is realer than all of it. And he is already in the room with you. Right now. In whatever desert you're sitting in. He is there. I know because he was in mine. I was a weapon aimed at his people. I was deployed to kill. I was everything the enemy needed me to be. And Jesus walked into a cold concrete room at 400 in the middle of the desert, and he said my name like he'd been waiting to say it my whole life. He will do the same for you. This is your call to arms, not to violence, not to pride, not to the performance of strength for men who are too afraid to admit they're as broken as you are, to love, to truth, to the brotherhood of men who have found the only king worth dying for, and discovered, in the finding, that he already died for them. The battle is real. The king is worthy. Will you answer? Brothers, if this story moved you, share it with one man who needs to hear it. Not 10, just one. The brother on your mind right now, the one you've been worried about, the one who's fighting the wrong battle, the one who's sitting in his own desert floor right now. Send it to him. That might be exactly why God put you in front of this video today. We'll see you in the next battle. Stay strong, stay faithful,